It's a good job I'm 18 now, because I'm gonna need alcohol for this. Oh, I spilt some on me. Do you know what? I'm gonna need to hug this plushie of Angel from Lilo and Stitch, because, like, the alcohol ain't working. So I might as well cut to the chase. What is the unit dating controversy? And no, it's not that time that Big Boy Benton had an affair with Yates.
Jon Pertwee's run on Doctor Who never gave clear dates as to when the events took place in Earth's chronology.
It gave some clues that led die-hard fans to happily conclude that it took place sometime in the future, probably the 1980s.
But then, a retcon happened!
So now there's a discrepancy where people don't know whether the unit stories took place in the 1980s or the 1970s. Let's get to the bottom of when in 20th Century Earth Jon Pertwee's run of Doctor Who actually took place. And also to the bottom of this, probably. Let's see what people on Team 80s have going for them. Why do they claim that this is the truth of the matter? First, we have to look at the very first story where the organisation of UNIT actually appeared. That was in the 8-part serial, The Invasion. This doesn't really have a date attached to it, unfortunately, other than it appearing to be 20th Century Earth. Mainly because it was filmed in the 20th century. One of the supporting characters in The Invasion actually appeared in a previous serial.
That character was Alistair Gordon Lethbridge-Stewart, who would later become a much beloved character throughout the Pertwee era, creating one of the greatest legacies of any Doctor Who character.
He's promoted to Brigadier from the rank of Colonel which he had in the Web of Fear. No explicit date was given in that serial either. However, The Web of Fear is a sequel to another story, that being The Abominable Snowmen. Many references to said serial are made,
including a fact we're looking for. One of the side characters, Professor Edward Travers, referred to the events of the Abominable Snowmen as being...
That's over 40 years ago.
Finally! We're getting somewhere! Now, does The Abominable Snowmen have a concrete date?
Well, Victoria mentions that it took place in 1935, as that's when they met Travers in Tibet.
And you met him, when was it you said, in 1935? In Tibet, yes.
Oh boy, we're getting there! Time to do some maths!
So, if The Web of Fear takes place over 40 years after The Abominable Snowmen, then it must take place sometime after 1975. So The Invasion, which takes place 4 years after The Web of Fear.
Of course, the Yetis, we met you in
That's right, McCrimmon in the Underground. Must be 4 years ago now.
And certainly the early, possibly all of the Jon Pertwee run, all take place circa mid to late 70s / the early 80s. This is also supported by the Pyramids of Mars, where good old Sarah Jane Smith explicitly states that she's from 1980.
I'm from 1980.
Although Sarah mentioning 1980 specifically feels a bit weird, because that's meant to be around the time The Invasion was set. So maybe she meant the 1980s, or maybe she rounded down, or she said, oh, I'm from 1980 because she remembers living in that year, even though she meant it multiple times. It doesn't really matter for what we're talking about here. This correlates with the date-based evidence we've seen beforehand.
So does the fact that Derek Sherwin, the man who set up the Jon Pertwee era, stated that the Third Doctor stories would take place in the near future, which we can see through the existence of space stations and BBC Three, which didn't exist in the early 70s.
So what seems to be the problem here?
Terrance Dicks isn't anti-80s, however he intentionally left the dates vague as not to cause continuity headaches, which makes sense.
Although he probably didn't think, if the show continued after his run, that there would be any solid dates given to any stories with UNIT, which would cause a bunch of continuity headaches, as he says. I'm sure no one would be stupid enough to do that sort of thing. Oh. So a bit of history about Mordrin Undead.
It's a story where the Doctor and co visit one of our favourite Time Lord's old friends, a schoolteacher, who was originally supposed to be Ian Chesterton, but because William Russell wasn't available, the production team settled on Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart.
He's popped up a lot, hasn't he? Also, not only did he have no history of being a teacher, he also had no indication of wanting to become a teacher. So that doesn't really work. What's worse, there are not only one, but two dates.
Present day, which is 1983, and quote-unquote the past, which is 1977.
Okay, false alarm. There seems to be nothing weird about that.
When did you leave unit, Brigadier?
7 years ago.
Now, unless the invasion, and all the way through to Robot, as well as Terror of the Zygons and the Android invasion, all took place in like the span of 1 year, and Sarah was lying about being from 1980, and Travers overestimated when the Abominable Snowmen took place in relation to the Web of Fear, this can't be. Okay, those conditions are possible, but extremely unlikely in my opinion. Mordred Undead also mentions that 1979 was the year that Big Boy Benton left. This makes things more icky because that's when the invasion was set. But it's not just Mordred Undead that proposes this new timeline. Other stories have done this as well. Although, before we get into those stories, one interesting point to make is about Carnival of Monsters. When the Doctor and Jo arrive, where they assume it's just a ship in the year 1926.
Jo proceeds to make a comment about how 1926 is
back about 40 years in time,
making the present day about 1966.
This supports neither case and is just a bunch of nonsense. But I think we can safely ignore this one as this is like a one-off. It's also an approximation. Also, Jo is probably really bad at maths. Here we go. Invasion of the Dinosaurs doesn't have a set date, but Sarah does give her age. She is 23. Now, as long as Sarah didn't give her age at a point that was also dated, we should be fine. Oh, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, whatever happened to Sarah Jane, an episode of the Sarah Jane Adventures had segments set in 1964, where Sarah said she was 13.
This lines up with Mordred Undead, but not the original theory. We're still in Planet of the Spiders and Robot. Sarah's unit pass is explicitly given the date of the 4th of April 1974. This again fits in with the retcon and not the original theory. Other major contradictions can be found in the spin-offs.
For instance, in the first, last and best episode of K9 and Company titled A Girl's Best Friend, Lavinia Smith says that the crate containing K9 Mark III arrived in 1978.
Which doesn't tell us anything, but if this is recent, then that means this is more in line with the retcon and not the original theory. If we are to believe Sarah has been on Earth for some time.
Another example can be found in the Sarah Jane Adventures serial, The Lost Boy.
Honestly, it's either going to be Sarah or the Brigadier, isn't it?
Anyways, in Sarah's unit dossier, a passage can be seen stating that unit quickly expanded, and making our presence felt in a golden period that spanned the 60s, 70s, and some would say, the 80s.
They're mocking this whole situation. This is not conclusive. So you can see why this isn't as clear-cut as you may think. Even though the original canon has a lot going for it, there is enough supporting evidence for this retcon that makes it equally as valid. But I've only spoken about evidence from the 2nd Doctor's era all the way to the 5th Doctor's era, and evidence pertaining to characters that were introduced then. So let's see if any unit stories from the show's future, post-Mordred Undead, actually gave anything conclusive. Oh no, I'm not looking forward to this segment. Let's look at Battlefield first, where a certain character appears.
That's right, it's the Brigadier again. Unit is also very in it, but Alistair's not just retired from Unit, he's teaching as well, and living with his wife, Doris.
Now there's no concrete proof within this story to ascertain the exact date of when this all happened.
TARDIS wiki states it's 1997.
Now the only real thing that I can point out within the story itself is that it is set in the near future.
As the Doctor says to Ace,
Earth! 2 years in your future.
Now we have another Jo situation, where a character stated a vague term to do with the date corresponding to another date. If we are to believe this is 1997, then the Doctor thinks a few years from Ace's time, which is 1987, is approximately 10 years. But I keep mentioning 1997. Where does that even come from?
I'll just cut straight to the point and say it's Project Lazarus. The computer system Oracle is cross-checking information with the Doctor and refers to the events of Remembrance of the Daleks and, more notably, Battlefield. We know this as Remembrance of the Daleks took place in Shoreditch 1963 and Battlefield in Carbury. The line of dialogue dated the events in Carbury to 1997.
But 1997 isn't as random of a year as you may think,
as the novelisation written by Mark Platt gives the detail of some dated material.
Now, the precise date of the events of this story are again not specifically stated.
However, Peter Wormsley's tax disc is dated to the 30th of June 1999.
This would imply that Battlefield takes place anywhere in between the 1st of July 1998 and the 30th of June 1999. Regardless if you count audio material or the novelisation canon or not. Whether you think Battlefield is set in 1997, 1998 or 1999, the point still stands that Ben Aronovich intentionally made this set in the near future. To me, this implies that because of the fact that he intentionally chose a near future setting, and that a near future setting was the intended purpose in the original timeline, I think Ben Aronovich is trying to support the original theory here. Aronovich actually made an official statement about the unit dating controversy in the DVD extra of Day of the Daleks known as the Unit Dating Conundrum.
There's nothing you can do about it. It's just stuffed, and you just pretend that it's taking place in an alternate universe with really dodgy kind of telescreens.
The tone of his voice and the language used implies that he supports the original theory as opposed to Mordred Undead's retcon. And indeed, Ben Aronovich does confirm that the date used in Mordred Undead is not the one he would have picked.
If you'd asked me, when should we set the Mordred Undead, I wouldn't have said 1977.
Okay, so Unit isn't a relic lost to the seas of time from the classic series, as New Who has had Unit stories as well. Now, I'm going to trawl through them all and try and find any evidence supporting one theory or the other. An interesting point to note is that all of RTD's Unit stories are indeed set in the near future, specifically in the year after they were broadcast. However, this is easily explained. Almost every contemporary RTD story made was actually set the year after broadcast as well. Why is this? Because Russell wanted to have the same timeline as the real world.
But in Aliens of London, the Doctor and Rose land 12 months after she left as opposed to 12 hours, causing everything to shift a year.
As this is in the near future, this could be agreeing with the original theory, but at the same time, that's not really the reasoning as to why it's set in the near future. This is close enough to the modern day to be supporting the retcon, but the reason why it's set in modern day is a creative decision that doesn't involve Unit whatsoever. Davies wanted to modernise the show, and that was the way he wanted to do it. Also, because of the 15-year hiatus, Russell was able to get away with resetting the Unit timeline in a way to make sure that none of anything I brought up so far actually mattered.
One reference was made in the Sontaran Stratagem, where the Doctor is trying to remember when he worked for Unit.
What, you used to work for them?
Yeah, a long time ago. Back in the 70s. Wasn't the 80s.
Other than that, no real reference has been made.
The first Unit story in the Stephen Moffat era was The Power of Three. Now, the year it took place in is contested. There is no solid date in it. But don't worry, morally dubious, wealth of knowledge, TARDIS Wiki probably has the answer to—
What do you mean this episode has its own dating controversy? Some people say 2012, because I guess the Ponds aged with the show.
Well, that can't be right, although it does make sense how this could be Kate's first meeting with the Doctor. The year's worth of travelling Amy and Rory spent with the Doctor sort of, debunks the logic of this argument.
Some people think circa 2020 because of the Hungry Earth and Cold Blood, because Amy and Rory are there too.
But that could be another visit they went on with the Doctor unrelated to this. Also, how does that explain how this is the first meeting with Kate, but also she knows who he is in 2013? What?
So, the Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe's final scene takes about 2 years after the Doctor left Amy and Rory, so that would mean it's about 2012-2013 time. Asylum of the Daleks takes place in the latter half of the following year because of Pond Life. Dinosaurs on a Spaceship takes about 10 months after that. point. And the Power 3 takes place not long after that.
It takes place around circa 2014 at the earliest. Gosh darn it, Day of the Doctor! Okay, we'll get onto that later, but for now, let's say it takes place circa 2014-2015. Depending on when you think the Doctor dropped Amy and Rory off. Regardless, the Power of 3 has no references to when any previous unit stories take place. So the Day of the Doctor. That old chestnut. It makes sense that 2013 would be the year that it's set thematically, as it is the 50th anniversary special. So either time travel caused Kate to know who the Doctor is earlier, and there's a bit of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey fuckery going on, or we have to bite the bullet and say it's not set in 2013. But that doesn't really matter. What does is the fact that they do actually reference the date of the Three Doctors. This is because Three Doctors actually appear in Day of the Doctor, and it makes sense that this unit has also dealt with a similar event where Three Doctors appeared in Chroma. Hence why Kate asks for Chroma.
As to when, Kate says,
70s or 80s, depending on the dating protocol.
Okay, Stephen is mocking us. He's clearly making fun of the situation, and it intentionally doesn't solve anything. Neither do the Series 8 finale or the Series 9 Zygon two-parter, as nothing is referenced in any of those episodes. And they're equally as vaguely contemporary as one another.
the Chibnall era has gotten rid of UNIT entirely.
Maybe to stop us fueling the fire of this debate. So there's nothing more for this. Good riddance if you ask me. So, we got nowhere. So what has actually tried to explain it? Now this is going to be a quick fire round, so hold on to your hats! Now I'll keep score for the original theory, the retcon, and some other bullshit, if there is any.
In the novelisation of the Sea Devils, North Sea oil was being exploited in 1978. As this happened a few years earlier, this indicates an early 1980s setting. The novel Blood Heat dates Spearhead from Space and Doctor Who and the Silurians to 1973. The Decalogue story, Prisoners of the Sun, takes place at least 20 years after the unit days in an alternate timeline. Mike Gates has a copy of the Radio Times dated to the 23rd of October 1993, dating Liz Shaw's time to circa 1973 at the latest. The Virgin New Adventures novel Millennial Rights states that the Inferno Project took place in the 1980s. In Downtime's novelisation, The Web of Fear is dated to 1968. In The Ghosts of N-Space, the Doctor mentions that a comet that's important to the plot passes Earth every 157 years. The last sighting was 1818, making the story set in 1975. The novel Who Killed Kennedy takes place all over the time frame we're trying to date, tying it into multiple historical events which took place between the late 60s and the early 70s. Past Doctor Adventures novel The Hollow Men dates the demons to 1971. The Past Doctor Adventures novel Deep Blue takes place 10 to 12 years before Tegan's time, which, as Turlough is with them, can be assumed to mean 1983 or 1984. And this is also 6 months after the Green Death, placing it in the early 1970s. The Past Doctor Adventure novel The Quantum Archangel dates the Time Monster to 1973. The Unit audio series is set in the early 21st century, and, in The Coop, it is stated that Lethbridge Stewart has been fighting aliens for 40 years. This implies that the Web of Fear took place in the 60s. The official Unit website refers to Unit being formed before the invasion, dated to 1968, and Spearhead from Space had its 35th anniversary in January, 35 years before 2005 was 1970. Other passages from this website became dialogue in the Sarah Jane Adventures episode The Lost Boy. In the companion chronicle Find and Replace, Joe Grant and Iris Welltime confirm that Joe's time at Unit was the 1970s. It doesn't indicate when though, so it's inconclusive. Both the Valley of Death and the Poseidon Adventure state that Lethbridge Stewart was in charge of Unit in 1979. The Puffin E short, The Spear of Destiny, states many times that the Doctor and Joe are in 1973. In the Dark Eyes 2 audio, Eyes of the Master reminisces about how the Doctor and himself are running out there somewhere in the 1970s. The Lethbridge Stewart novel, The Forgotten Son, yes, we're delving into this spin-off now, is set right after the Web of Fear, and the novel is set during the spring of 1968. The Big Finish monthly range audio, Last of the Cybermen, dates the invasion to 1975, which therefore dates the Web of Fear to 1971. This is very not the retcon, but it also doesn't mathematically follow the original theory either. So therefore I'm going to label this as bullshit. The 12 Doctors of Christmas story, The Christmas Inversion, had the Third Doctor and co. arrive during the events of the Christmas invasion, and he is told his unit pass expired 30 years ago, meaning it expired in the 1970s. The Tales of Terror story, The Monster in the Woods, has the Third Doctor give the year 1973. However, he's still in exile. The next story, Toil and Trouble, dates Terror of the Zygons to circa 1975.
So it seems most sources seem to hold the retcon in higher regard. However, I feel like the original theory has a much stronger claim, has more things supporting it logically. So I don't think that this is conclusively, yes, the retcon is the true timeline. Okay, right, last resort. If we're gonna have to resolve this, we need to find something that definitively tries to solve it by trying to accommodate both timelines and trying to answer how they can coexist.
One solution offered is in the BBC Past Doctor Adventures novel, The Face of the Enemy, which states that Mordred Undead took place in an alternate universe, and not only reiterates that the invasion took place 4 years after the Web of Fear, but Spearhead from Space took place 2 years after the invasion. Another solution is offered by Mark Platt. Platt, we meet again! In his novelisation of Downtime. It states there's no official dates in the documentation.
I don't think this is very satisfactory, as the 40 years line was actually said before UNIT was formed. Although, due to the fact that no date is specifically mentioned, this could in theory support either the original theory or the retcon.
The interference duology has the Doctor take responsibility for this, but he's cut off when he says why, as all we get is that he called it a temporal slippage. In the Lethbridge Stewart, The Havoc Files story, The Enfolded Time, it's something to do with the fact that the TARDIS lands on Earth in the general area and that time frame of 1968 to 1989, and the Time War or something. Oh no, I've not read it.
But finally, we have something conclusive that manages to fit both timelines in the same chronology.
The second episode of The Legacy of Time, titled The Split Infinitive, actually solves it. A temporal experiment crunches the 60s and the 70s together. Ace explains that this causes UNIT's timeline to be scrambled, and the Doctor mentions that he always wondered how someone could be working in their prime in the 80s but have retired in the 70s, directly referencing the Brigadier. Thank you, John Dorney, for ending my suffering!
So that was the UNIT dating controversy. I needed this. Trust me, this was a literal headache to write. Now, if you've made it this far, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Remember to share the video and turn on the notification bell to make sure you get all of our latest uploads. Thank you for watching, and here's a toast for 50 years of Jon Pertwee's run of Doctor Who. I hope you enjoy the rest of Pertwee month. See you soon.